very often the main things that happen in life are things that you just didn't plan for. I mean, they just happen.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Live Through That, the podcast where influential artists of the 80s and 90s talk to us about a pivotal moment in their lives. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and this week I'm pleased to welcome the legendary Colin Newman to the show. Colin formed the influential band Wire in 1976, and in 1977 they released Pink Flag. Pink Flag would go on to influence countless post-punk and new wave bands. Wire is famous for never looking backwards, always creating something new and exciting with each new release. Today, Colin tells us about how his relationship with his own catalog and music in general shifted during something which affected all of us, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, there have been various times in my life where things happened, and in hindsight, you can see that it changed the course of my life. But actually, I'm going to choose something which I think a lot of people will choose, and that is the COVID pandemic, because it changed a lot of people's lives, and it changed a lot of people's lives in very different and very specific way, and it changed my life in very different and specific ways. And I'm definitely not the same person I was in 2019, and I don't think I'm on a similar trajectory at all. If you look at the period 2010 to 2020, this was a concerted effort on my part to bring Wire to a place where it was properly viewed as a contemporary band. I mean, we'd had the Send album that came out in 2003, but in a typical act of, sort of Wire self-navel gazing, or whatever you might want to call it. I mean, we managed to drive the bus off the cliff, so it all had to be put back together again. And we had something that was movable by 2010. And in the period 2010 to 2020, there was a period of positive development for the band. We created what you would call contemporary Wire. And but also in terms of the band as a business, we were able to make money out of it on a fairly continuous level. But what happened is two things happened in 2020. And one was the obvious thing, which was the pandemic. Everybody had to stop. I mean, Wire was literally on tour in North America, and we started the tour playing to full audiences. By the time we came to what turned out to be the last dates, 50% of the audience was not turning up. And, physically what stopped it was the governor of Massachusetts saying, no more events over a certain size. And, we would have been traveling to a sold out show in Boston that, we were way over what was allowed. So, and it just became obvious we had to come home. I literally got home. I got in the door. Malka said, clean down your luggage. And I kind of sort of decompressed. And 4 days later, we were in lockdown. I mean, it was boom. It was a complete change of circumstance. But something else happened at the same time, which is a longer story, and that was Pink Flag, which is Wire's label, which I run, the acquisition of the 70s catalogue. This was a piece of a concerted effort on my part, and a combination between that and some very good luck. What it meant was that in 2017, September 2017 to be precise, Wire became the the de facto owners of its own classic catalogue. Now, there were a lot of expenses around that, and there was the cost of buying it, there was the cost of manufacturing the things that we released because of it, and then because the original plan for 2020 was quite a big one, and we had 2 releases, so second half of 2019, we were manufacturing for 2 releases in 2020. So all of those things didn't really unwind until May 2020. But from May 2020, the financial circumstances around the band basically changed and changed forever. I don't think a lot of people outside of the industry, even a lot of artists, don't really understand what's happened with classic catalogue and streaming. Classic catalogue has become the mainstay of streaming. Yeah, there's the big artists, but outside of the obvious big artists, there is also because if you say go back 5 years to look at Spotify or one of the other services, you're really talking about the type of person who would be consuming that would be kind of the crate digger type of person. Oh, I've never heard this band. Yeah, I hear this, and they would understand implicitly that, wow, I only have to pay £5 a month for this. Yeah, that's great. And I can hear any music I want. And this somehow in the last few years, and I think accelerating with the pandemic, suddenly became a mainstream product when ordinary people thought, oh, yeah. So I don't have to get those records out or my CDs out. I can just listen to this music. And I can have it on my phone, and oh look, they've got the Rolling Stones. And I mean, that is literally, when you engage a mainstream audience with anything to do with music, they'll choose the things that they know. It's an inevitability. So on a scale with the kind of Rolling Stones and Neil Young and whatever at the top, and someone you've never heard of at the bottom who's had 0 streams on Spotify, there's a fertile middle ground, and quite a way up there in the long tail sit Wire. Wire's 70s catalogue is and remains popular. Within, it's not as popular as other things, but it's certainly popular enough to generate income and to generate, it's not life-changing amounts of money, but most bands in that sort of middle area, they basically rely on putting out an album every couple of years and doing a bit of touring around it, and they sort of muddle through somehow financially, and that's kind of how Wire were managing. And now we don't actually have to do that. And that, combined with the fact that you couldn't for 2 years, has created a very different circumstances. And then something else happened at the same time. And that's another development, which is that during that last tour of America, we took the decision, actually it was Matthew from Wire's idea, that we would take it in turns to DJ before each performance of Wire, so a different member of the band would DJ. I mean, it's a typical Matt idea. It was like, how can you so often with support bands, unless you get one that's really, really good, the audience are turned off by them. And, I mean, it's a sort of, you don't what we've over the years with Wire really tried hard not to have endless, like, here's the local post-punk band, because there's just only so much kind of a certain kind of tone that people can take. You don't want them bored by the time they've got to you. So the idea of the band keeps it all in house. It's a kind of neat idea, and it's sort of woke up in me something which had been around quite a long time. I mean, like, Malcolm and I have DJ'd at various points in the past. We've even had a radio show in the past, and I started when I got back. I thought, it's like, it was really good. We Malcolm and I, before the tour, had sat down and chosen a bunch of stuff that I could choose to play from, so that I had a kind of a virtual record bag, and that kind of started the process. And then in the deepest lockdown, we were walking out, and we took a slightly different route to the one that we normally would take walking, and we met a friend of ours who was literally out putting out his recycling, a guy called Daniel, and Daniel is very much involved with the cultural scene here in Brighton, specifically also with radio. And we kind of knew that that we're putting a new station together. And I sort of mentioned to him that, I'd done this DJ, and wouldn't it be great to have a radio show? And half an hour later, we had a radio show, weekly radio show. And it was like, oh, all right, what just happened there? And we had no idea exactly what it was, what it would entail. That was in the May. By the July, we were kind of ready, and we did our first show. So July 2020, and we've done a weekly show ever since. And that has completely changed my attitude and feeling towards music. I mean, when I was a kid, I was a really mad music fan. I was always known as the one that I knew all the bands. I knew who was who. I knew what was good. I knew what the best albums were, what the best tracks on the best albums were. I was that kind of nerdy person that kind of knew all that stuff. And then when you get involved with a band, and then the day-to-day running of it, and you're kind of very fixed on your own self, you can't, there isn't space to be that level of fan. I think a lot of people in bands like to kind of pretend that they're big fans of music, but there's an awful lot of like, it's all about me, really. And it felt like, well, we couldn't really do anything in terms of making music or making touring or whatever. I mean, Wire was definitely off the table, but even Immersion, which is Malcolm and I, we couldn't really. We did one show, which was a very special kind of socially distanced thing. But basically, everything to do with touring, all that was completely off the card. We didn't meet anybody. We didn't go anywhere, but we had this radio show. And then we thought, well, we could reach out to people as well. Why don't we have our friends on the show? Our friends might live anywhere in the world. They might live in LA. They might be in Tokyo. They might be wherever. And so we started doing that on a weekly basis. I mean, you do a podcast, so you understand that there is a discipline to these things, and to produce something to a weekly timetable is quite a lot of work. But you kind of have this sense of that you're serving the wider music community. We live in Brighton. Brighton is a very, very interesting music city in Britain. It boxes way above its weight in terms of the size of the city, and has over the years developed a really strong scene here. And Slack City, the station that we broadcast on, it's an actual broadcast show. It's all on the internet. Everything's always on the internet, but it was important to me that we had a broadcast show, that people listened to it in real time, that people could tune in and discover it, even if they had no idea who we were or whatever. And it's been a fantastic and interesting growing experience, and certainly has completely changed my relationship to music. I don't know if it's changed my attitude to music, but it's changed my relationship with music. I definitely have a different relationship. I know much more about what's going on with music now. I know much more about stuff that's gone in the last 10 years that I'd completely missed. And the show's not just about new music, but it's a kind of a fascinating thing. And this is what I feel, that one's life. I mean, you can plan. I'm quite good at planning. I have, I can make quite long-term plans, but very often the main things that happen in life are things that you just didn't plan for. I mean, they just happen. And it's like my my life has kind of stumbled towards this direction. And in a way, I am lucky enough to be able to say, okay, well, let's see where that goes and let's see what happens.
The beginning of the pandemic was filled with a lot of unease and confusion about what was happening, what we should be doing, when is this going to end. But even in all the chaos, there were some benefits to life slowing down during the spring of 2020. Colin found himself working on new music and reconnecting with that alongside his wife, Malka Spiegel.
It was amazing because what also happened was the weather was awesome. That spring was beautiful. And I mean, during the May, we would be walking out where we live. We live 10 minutes walk from the sea, but also 10 minutes walk from the Downs. The Downs are a particular British kind of parlance, meaning upland. I know, how can upland be down? Well, it is. Okay. And you get up, you can get up on the top there and you have fields and there are skylarks nesting in the fields. And at that time, there were no cars, there were no planes, and you can't see any dwellings of any kind. You know, you could have gone back 1,000 years. All you hear is the sound of the skylarks and the wind blowing across your ears. I mean, it was absolutely magical. And we were actually working on a record. We put out last year something called Nanocluster Volume One. It's a bit of a complex story, but Malcolm and I have had an event in Brighton for the past few years, a very occasional event where we collaborate with another artist. I'll try and keep it short. We work here in this studio together with another artist, and we make a bunch of material, and then we perform that live together. And that's completely new material that nobody has ever heard before as part of an event. And the original plan, we'd done 4 of these over a period of 3 or 4 years. And the plan was to then, during 2020, was to bring all the artists back here and then we work on the tracks together. And of course, we realized that was not possible to do. So we finished the album between us, just the two of us. We just made the album. And that was a very interesting experience because although we've worked together, Malcolm and I, for many years, we'd never really mixed and finished an album together. And it was an amazing experience. Just everything about that period, that spring and summer of 2020 was just magical. When I look back at it, it's just, we didn't have to do anything. We did everything that we wanted to do. And the weather was beautiful. The one thing you must never do, especially as an older artist, is become a comedy version of yourself. But I mean, in the end, you shouldn't be any version of yourself. You should just be yourself. I mean, I am who I am, and I confound many people's expectations about who I am and what kind of person I am and what I'm interested in. I mean, there will be definitely people who listen to our radio and show and can't stand it because we play music they hate. Because people like to put you in a box. So I'm sort of some post-punk person. Actually, post-punk is probably my least favorite kind of music. We play between us a very, very wide range of musical styles because it's what we like. Everything from modern classical to the latest TikTok star. And we don't play by genre. It's curated by aesthetic. So we will tend towards having things which have certain kinds of characteristics in order to keep the mix interesting, rather than saying, oh yeah, we want to, what's the latest record of this genre, because genre is so boring. It's marketing.
Thank you to Colin for taking the time to share your story. His radio show with his wife Malka, Swimming in Sound, is still running and new episodes are out every Wednesday. Check the links on the show page to find out how to listen. I also want to thank the band Joop Joop for creating our theme song. You can find out more about their music at joopjoopmusic.com. And a friendly reminder that you can also buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel on 90s artists, Live Through That, wherever you buy your books. And if you like this show, please subscribe so you'll know when the latest episode comes out. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Mike Hipple Photo, all one word. Thanks for listening. We'll have more stories next week.